Good evening. Welcome to Whispered History. Tonight, we journey back nearly 9 centuries to an age when towering stone castles watched over fertile valleys, when armored knights rode beneath fluttering banners, when monks copied sacred books by candlelight, and when entire kingdoms answered a call that would send tens of thousands across mountains, deserts, and distant seas. This is the story of the Second Crusade. It is a tale of hope, faith, ambition, and disappointment. A story that begins not with victory, but with the fragile peace left behind after one of the most extraordinary military expeditions in medieval history. Tonight, we will walk through the bustling streets of medieval Europe, stand beneath the magnificent walls of Constantinople, cross the rugged mountains of Anatolia, visit the holy city of Jerusalem, and witness the dramatic events that forever changed both Europe and the Middle East. As always, our journey will move at a calm and gentle pace. This is not a tale meant to rush from battle to battle. Instead, it will take time to appreciate the landscapes, the people, the castles, the monasteries, and the remarkable civilizations that shape this fascinating chapter of history. So, whether you're settling into bed after a long day, relaxing on the sofa, or simply looking for a peaceful escape into the past, you're in exactly the right place. Before we continue our journey, I have one small favor to ask. If you enjoy these relaxing history documentaries, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to Whispered History. Every like helps these peaceful historical journeys reach more people. Every comment tells YouTube that slow, thoughtful history still has a place in today's fast-moving world. And by subscribing, you'll never miss another evening exploring forgotten kingdoms, ancient empires and medieval battles, legendary frontiers, and the remarkable people who shaped our world. Now, dim the lights. Take a slow, comfortable breath. Allow your shoulders to relax. Settle beneath a warm blanket or into your favorite chair. As the sounds of today slowly fade away, let your imagination carry you back to Europe. The year is 1144. Almost 50 years have passed since the astonishing success of the First Crusade. To many Christians living in Western Europe, the victory still felt almost miraculous. When Pope Urban II had called for the First Crusade in 1095, few believed such an ambitious expedition could truly succeed. Thousands had answered his call: knights, farmers, priests, merchants, and nobles left their homes to journey thousands of miles toward Jerusalem. Many never returned. Those who survived endured hunger, disease, freezing winters, scorching deserts, and countless battles. Yet against extraordinary odds, the Crusaders captured Jerusalem in the summer of 1099. The victory echoed throughout Europe. Church bells rang. Monasteries recorded the triumph in carefully written manuscripts. Songs celebrated the bravery of those who had reached the holy city. To many Christians, it seemed that divine favor had guided the expedition. But winning Jerusalem had only been the beginning. Holding it would prove far more difficult. Following the First Crusade, the victorious Crusaders established several new Christian states throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. These became known collectively as the Crusader states. There was the Kingdom of Jerusalem, stretching across much of the Holy Land, the County of Tripoli, along the Mediterranean coast, the Principality of Antioch, guarding the northern frontier, and the County of Edessa, far to the northeast. Each state faced enormous challenges. Although European knights ruled these territories, they remained surrounded by powerful Muslim kingdoms. Distance created another obstacle. Jerusalem stood nearly 3,000 miles from Paris, even farther from London. Communication took months. Reinforcements arrived only occasionally. Every castle required soldiers. Every road required protection. Every harvest mattered. Despite these difficulties, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Stone castles appeared upon rocky hills, markets filled with merchants from many different cultures. Pilgrims once again traveled safely toward Jerusalem. European settlers established villages beside older communities that had existed for centuries. The Eastern Mediterranean became a remarkable meeting place. Latin Christians, Greek Christians, Armenians, Muslims, and Jewish communities all lived within the region, sometimes peacefully, sometimes uneasily, but always sharing the same landscape. Imagine awakening in Jerusalem during the early 12th century. Morning sunlight slowly warms the golden stone walls. Church bells echo through narrow streets. Nearby, the call to prayer rises from Muslim neighborhoods. Merchants arrange spices from Arabia, silks from Byzantium, glass from Syria, olive oil from local farms. Pilgrims arrive from France, Germany, England, Italy, speaking languages unfamiliar to one another, yet united by a common destination. Outside the city, farmers tend vineyards, shepherds guide flocks across rolling hills, caravans travel dusty roads stretching toward Damascus, Aleppo, and Cairo. The Crusader states were not isolated military camps. They were living societies, complex, diverse, and constantly adapting. Many European settlers slowly learned local customs. Some adopted lighter clothing better suited to the warm climate. Others learned Arabic or Greek to trade more easily. Eastern and Western traditions sometimes blended together in surprising ways. Food reflected this exchange. European bread accompanied olives, dates, figs, and fragrant spices unknown in much of Western Europe. Architecture also evolved. Strong European castles incorporated Byzantine and Middle Eastern ideas. Builders learned new methods of fortification. Some of the greatest castles ever constructed rose during this remarkable period. One such fortress, Croix des Chevaliers, would eventually become among the finest military strongholds of the medieval world. Far beyond these castles, the Islamic world was also changing. For many years, Muslim rulers throughout the Middle East had often governed independently. Powerful cities such as Damascus, Aleppo, Mosul, and Cairo each pursued their own ambitions. Occasionally they cooperated. Just as often, they competed. This division had helped the First Crusade succeed. Instead of facing one united opponent, the Crusaders encountered numerous regional rulers whose interests did not always align. Yet history rarely remains unchanged for long. During the early 12th century, a new generation of Muslim leaders began imagining something different. Instead of division, they sought unity. Instead of rivalry, they spoke of cooperation. One city became especially important, Mosul, situated beside the Tigris River. It stood at the crossroads of trade, politics, and military power. There, a determined ruler quietly expanded his influence. His name was Imad ad-Din Zengi. Although few people in Europe recognized his name, his decisions would soon alter the course of history. Patiently, methodically, Zengi strengthened his armies, forged alliances, captured neighboring territories. Unlike many rulers before him, he looked beyond local rivalries. His ambition reached much farther. He believed the Crusader states could be defeated, not through isolated battles, but through careful planning and lasting unity. Far away in Europe, most people remained unaware of these developments. Life continued much as it always had. Kings governed their kingdoms. Monks illuminated beautiful manuscripts. Farmers harvested wheat beneath summer skies. Children played outside castle walls. Pilgrims still dreamed of visiting Jerusalem. Few suspected that the fragile balance established after the First Crusade was beginning to unravel. Within only a few years, one city would fall. Its loss would send shockwaves across Christendom. Churches throughout Europe would once again call for a great expedition. Thousands would take up the cross. Kings themselves would march east, and history would remember that remarkable journey as the Second Crusade. But before armies gather, before banners rise above medieval castles, and before thousands begin their long march toward the Holy Land, we must first visit the frontier where everything changed, the County of Edessa, for it was there, on the distant edge of the Crusader world, that the first shadow of the Second Crusade quietly appeared. The County of Edessa stood farther east than any of the other Crusader states. It was the first Crusader state established after the First Crusade, and, in many ways, it was also the most vulnerable. Unlike Jerusalem, which benefited from access to the Mediterranean coast, or Antioch, protected by powerful walls and nearby allies, Edessa stretched across a wide frontier. Its castles overlooked open plains. Its villages lay scattered among fertile valleys. Its rivers carried merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers alike. Yet those same roads also allowed enemies to approach from several directions. To understand why Edessa mattered so deeply, imagine standing atop its massive stone walls on a peaceful spring morning around the year 1135. The sun rises over rolling hills covered in wildflowers. The distant Euphrates River glitters beneath the golden light. Farmers guide oxen through rich fields. Caravans arrive from Syria carrying silk, spices, perfume, and finely crafted metalwork. Church bells echo softly across the city. Not far away, the voices of merchants speaking Armenian, Arabic, Greek, Syriac, and Latin filled the busy marketplace. Edessa was far more than a military outpost. It was a crossroads of civilizations. For centuries before the Crusaders arrived, the city had already possessed a long and remarkable history, known today as Şanlıurfa in southeastern Turkey. Edessa had belonged to Romans, Byzantines, Armenians, and Muslim rulers at different moments throughout its past. Its streets reflected every chapter of that history. Stone churches stood not far from elegant mosques. Ancient Roman roads connected neighborhoods built by later generations. The city itself seemed to preserve memories from many different worlds. When Baldwin of Boulogne, one of the leaders of the First Crusade, entered the city in 1098, he became its first Latin ruler. Rather than continuing immediately toward Jerusalem, he accepted leadership of Edessa. That decision created the First Crusader state for nearly half a century. The county survived through careful diplomacy, strong castles, and shifting alliances. The population itself remained remarkably diverse. Most people living in Edessa were not Western Europeans. Instead, Armenian Christians formed a large part of the population. There were also Syriac Christians, Greek Christians, Muslims, and Jewish communities. Latin rulers depended heavily upon cooperation with local people. Without that support, holding such distant territory would have been nearly impossible. Daily life followed a peaceful rhythm whenever war remained far away. At sunrise, craftsmen opened their workshops. Blacksmiths hammered glowing iron into horseshoes and swords. Weavers produced colorful fabrics. Bakers filled the streets with the comforting scent of fresh bread. Children hurried through narrow stone alleys laughing together. Pilgrims rested after long journeys. Travelers exchanged stories gathered from distant lands. Nearby monasteries preserved ancient manuscripts copied patiently by monks. Some books required years to complete, every page decorated with careful illustrations painted by hand. Knowledge passed quietly from one generation to another beneath candlelight. Outside the city, the countryside remained equally busy. Fields of wheat rippled beneath warm summer winds. Olive groves climbed gentle hillsides. Shepherds watched sheep grazing peacefully across rocky meadows. The Euphrates River supported fishing boats and irrigation channels that nourished fertile farmland. To someone arriving from northern Europe, the landscape must have seemed wonderfully different, warmer, brighter, filled with unfamiliar plants and birdsong. Yet beneath this peaceful appearance, Edessa faced constant uncertainty. Unlike the Kingdom of Jerusalem, its borders stretched close to powerful Muslim cities. Distance separated it from reliable military support. If attacked, help might require weeks or even months to arrive. The rulers of Edessa understood this reality well. Castles guarded important roads, watchtowers stood upon high hills, mounted patrols regularly explored the surrounding countryside. Every traveler carried news, every merchant brought rumors, every caravan might reveal changes beyond the frontier far to the east. One man listened carefully to those same reports. His name was Imad ad-Din Zengi, born around 1085. Zengi had grown up during an age of political uncertainty. The Seljuk Empire, once enormously powerful, had gradually fragmented into competing regional states. Local rulers often fought one another rather than cooperating. This division had allowed the First Crusade to succeed decades earlier. Zengi believed that mistakes should never be repeated. He possessed remarkable determination. Unlike many medieval rulers who focused only upon expanding personal wealth, Zengi dreamed of uniting Muslim territories under stronger leadership. Patiently, he strengthened his position. The city of Mosul became the foundation of his growing power. Located beside the mighty Tigris River, Mosul controlled valuable trade routes linking Persia, Mesopotamia, and Syria. Merchants from every direction passed through its bustling markets. Taxes enriched the city's treasury. Resources flowed steadily into Zengi's expanding army. But military strength alone could not achieve his ambitions. Zengi proved equally skilled as a politician. He forged alliances when useful, applied pressure when necessary, captured neighboring territories one after another. Some submitted peacefully, others resisted. Gradually, his influence spread across northern Mesopotamia. By the late 1130s, he also gained control of Aleppo. This achievement changed everything. For the first time in many years, Mosul and Aleppo stood united beneath one ruler. The Crusader states suddenly faced a far stronger neighbor than before. In Europe, few people recognized the significance of these developments. The Holy Land seemed distant. Most kings concerned themselves with local rivalries, harvests, taxes, dynastic marriages. Yet, in the East, experienced leaders immediately understood the danger. The County of Edessa now stood between Zengi's expanding territories. Its position became increasingly isolated. Within Edessa itself, leadership also weakened. Count Jocelyn II inherited the county in 1131. Unlike some earlier Crusader leaders, he struggled to maintain the same level of authority. Political disagreements emerged. Resources became stretched. Relations with neighboring allies occasionally grew strained. No single mistake doomed Edessa. Rather, a series of smaller challenges gradually reduced its strength. History often changes this way, not through one dramatic event, but through many quiet decisions unfolding over years. Meanwhile, Zengi remained patient. He did not rush toward battle. He carefully studied his opponents. He watched alliances shift. He observed which castles received reinforcements and which stood increasingly alone. His generals gathered intelligence from merchants, travelers, and local communities. Every piece of information mattered. Timing, Zengi believed, could decide wars before armies even marched. Imagine one quiet evening within his palace at Mosul. Oil lamps flicker gently against carved stone walls. Maps cover a large wooden table. Messengers arrive carrying reports from distant frontiers. Military commanders discuss roads, water sources, castle defenses, and harvest seasons. Outside, the city gradually falls asleep. Inside, plans slowly take shape. No one speaks loudly. There's no dramatic celebration, only quiet preparation. For Zengi understood that true victories often begin long before the battlefield. Back in Edessa, life continued almost normally. Churches welcomed worshipers. Markets remained busy. Children still chased one another through the streets. The city walls stood firm beneath the bright Middle Eastern sun. Most people could not imagine how quickly everything would change. The peaceful routine that had lasted for decades felt secure, comforting, permanent. Yet history reminds us that permanence is often an illusion. Beyond the horizon, armies quietly gathered. Supply wagons filled with grain and weapons began moving along dusty roads. Messengers rode between cities carrying sealed letters. The balance established after the First Crusade was beginning to shift. And before long, one of the greatest shocks the Christian world had experienced since the fall of Jerusalem centuries earlier would unfold before the walls of Edessa. Its capture would send fear throughout Europe. Popes would write urgent letters. Monks would preach with renewed passion. Kings themselves would take up the cross. The Second Crusade was about to begin. The year was 1144. Winter approached the hills of northern Mesopotamia. The mornings had grown cooler. Soft mist settled over fertile valleys before the rising sun slowly revealed fields, villages, and ancient stone walls. To the people living within the County of Edessa, life still seemed familiar. Merchants continued filling the marketplaces. Church bells echoed through the streets. Children laughed in narrow alleyways. Pilgrims rested after long journeys across the Holy Land. Few suspected that history was quietly moving toward one of its great turning points. Far away, in the city of Mosul, Imad ad-Din Zengi had made his decision. For years, he had strengthened his armies, united neighboring territories, and patiently waited for the right opportunity. Now, that opportunity had finally arrived. The County of Edessa stood unusually vulnerable. Its ruler, Count Jocelyn II, had left much of the county's military strength elsewhere while dealing with political concerns beyond the city. Only a relatively small garrison remained to defend the walls. To Zengi, this was the moment he had been waiting for. Late in November, his army began its march. Thousands of soldiers moved steadily across the countryside. Infantry marched beneath colorful banners. Horsemen rode ahead as scouts. Engineers transported heavy siege equipment. Carpenters carried tools needed to build siege towers and wooden defenses. Supply wagons stretched for miles along dusty roads. Unlike earlier raids, this expedition had a single clear objective: capture Edessa. As news of the approaching army spread, villages along the frontier hurried to prepare. Some families gathered possessions. Others sought shelter behind fortified walls. Messengers rode day and night carrying urgent warnings toward nearby Crusader territories. Within Edessa itself, the city's leaders quickly recognized the seriousness of the situation. Church bells rang throughout the streets. Citizens gathered inside churches to pray. Craftsmen abandoned workshops to help strengthen the defenses. Blacksmiths worked long into the night repairing swords, helmets, and spearheads. Archers inspected bundles of arrows. Stonemasons reinforced weakened sections of the walls. Everyone understood their role. Every pair of hands mattered. Standing above the city, the great walls of Edessa appeared impressive, built and strengthened over many centuries. They surrounded the city with thick stone defenses. Towers overlooked the surrounding countryside. Massive gates controlled entry along the main roads. Deep ditches complicated any direct assault. Many believed the city could withstand a lengthy siege, yet walls alone could never guarantee safety. Every fortress depended upon food, water, morale, and hope. Soon, Zengi's army appeared upon the horizon. From the towers, lookouts watched endless columns of soldiers slowly spreading across the surrounding landscape. Campfires multiplied as evening approached. Thousands of tents covered the fields beyond the city. The siege had begun. Life inside Edessa changed almost overnight. The gates closed. Travel ceased. Merchants could no longer bring fresh supplies into the city. Families rationed food carefully. Water remained available. But everyone understood that provisions would eventually become scarce if relief failed to arrive. Still, hope remained strong. The citizens believed neighboring Crusader rulers would come to their aid. Messengers slipped through the siege lines under cover of darkness. Some succeeded, others never returned. Each carried desperate appeals for reinforcements. Meanwhile, outside the walls, Zengi wasted little time. Rather than launching reckless assaults, he relied upon patience. His engineers began constructing siege engines. Workers dug trenches. Archers established protected positions. Most importantly, miners quietly began tunneling beneath sections of the city walls. Medieval siege warfare demanded remarkable engineering. Long before gunpowder transformed battlefields, armies relied upon persistence and careful planning. Siege towers rolled slowly toward defensive walls. Battering rams attacked fortified gates. Catapults hurled enormous stones through the air. Underground tunnels weakened foundations until entire sections of wall collapsed under their own weight. Every method required time. Every day tested the resolve of both attackers and defenders. Inside Edessa, the people endured growing uncertainty. Imagine walking through the city during those difficult weeks. The marketplace remains quieter than usual. Food grows increasingly expensive. Parents comfort anxious children. Priests lead prayers inside candlelit churches. Soldiers stand watch through long winter nights atop cold stone towers. Every morning, citizens climb the walls searching the horizon. Perhaps today, friendly banners will appear. Perhaps relief is finally coming. Yet every sunrise reveals only the same endless camps surrounding the city. Hope begins to fade slowly, not all at once, but little by little, outside. Winter rains occasionally turned the ground to mud. Cold winds swept across the camps. The besieging army suffered hardships as well. Disease threatened crowded encampments. Food required constant transportation from surrounding territories. Maintaining discipline among thousands of soldiers proved challenging. Yet Zengi refused to abandon the siege. He understood the importance of Edessa. Capturing the city would demonstrate that the Crusader states were no longer invincible. As December passed, the miners achieved their objective. Hidden beneath the earth, they carefully removed supporting timbers after completing long tunnels beneath one vulnerable tower. On December the 24th, 1144, the weakened foundations finally gave way. With a deafening roar, part of Edessa's mighty wall collapsed. Clouds of dust rose into the winter sky. For a brief moment, everything stood silent. Then, Zengi's soldiers surged forward. The defenders fought desperately. Archers released volley after volley. Knights charged through broken streets. Citizens joined the struggle wherever they could. The battle spread throughout the city, house by house, street by street. Church bells rang wildly above the noise of battle. Smoke drifted between ancient buildings. The struggle continued until resistance gradually became impossible. After nearly half a century of Crusader rule, Edessa had fallen. The capture of the city marked far more than a military victory. It shattered the confidence established after the First Crusade. For decades, many Europeans believed the Crusader states could endure indefinitely. Now, one of them had disappeared. News traveled remarkably slowly during the Middle Ages, yet some events seemed to move with astonishing speed. Merchants carried the story westward, pilgrims repeated what they had witnessed, letters crossed mountains and seas, one monastery copied another's reports. Soon, the news reached Antioch, then Jerusalem, eventually Constantinople, finally Western Europe. The reaction bordered upon disbelief. Churches filled with worried worshippers. Nobles gathered to discuss the consequences. Kings received alarming reports from distant lands. Many feared that Edessa represented only the beginning. If one Crusader state could fall, could the others survive? Would Antioch be next, or Jerusalem itself? The emotional impact reached far beyond politics. To Christians throughout Europe, Jerusalem remained one of the holiest places on earth. The loss of Edessa seemed to threaten the fragile balance protecting the Holy Land. The Church could not ignore such a disaster. In Rome, Pope Eugene III carefully considered the growing crisis. Unlike Pope Urban II, who had called the First Crusade nearly 50 years earlier, Eugene inherited a very different world. The Crusader states already existed, yet now they stood in danger. He understood that Europe required new leadership, new inspiration, another great expedition. Within months, letters would leave Rome carrying an urgent appeal. A famous monk would travel from town to town delivering powerful sermons. Kings themselves would kneel before the cross. Entire cities would gather to hear the call. The Second Crusade no longer existed merely as an idea. It had become a necessity. And soon, the voice calling Europe to arms would belong to one of the most influential men of the Middle Ages. His name was Bernard of Clairvaux. The fall of Edessa sent a wave of shock across the Christian world. During the Middle Ages, news traveled slowly. There were no newspapers, no telegraphs, no printed books arriving every morning. Instead, history moved from person to person. A merchant carried a story from one city to the next. A pilgrim repeated what he had witnessed while praying in a monastery. A bishop copied letters by hand before sending messengers across kingdoms. Weeks became months. Months sometimes became an entire season. Yet despite these slow methods, some events seemed to spread with remarkable speed. The loss of Edessa was one of them. Throughout Europe, churches filled with anxious worshippers, monasteries copied reports describing the city's fall, kings gathered their advisors, nobles discussed the future of the Holy Land. Many remembered the miraculous victories of the First Crusade almost 50 years earlier. Now, those victories no longer seem permanent. If Edessa had fallen, could Antioch survive? Would Tripoli be next? Could Jerusalem itself once again be threatened? No one knew. Far away in Rome, the responsibility for answering those questions rested upon one man, Pope Eugene III. Born as Bernardo Paganelli around the year 1080, Eugene had not begun life expecting to become the leader of the Catholic Church. Like many men of his generation, he entered religious life quietly. He became a Cistercian monk, living simply, praying daily, and devoting himself to faith rather than politics. One of the greatest influences upon his life had been his teacher, Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was already becoming famous throughout Europe. He possessed neither a crown nor an army, yet kings respected his advice. Bishops admired his wisdom. Ordinary people traveled great distances simply to hear him preach. His words carried enormous influence. When Eugene became pope in 1145, he inherited a church facing many challenges. Political conflicts surrounded Rome, disagreements divided powerful rulers, and now, news from the Holy Land demanded immediate attention. After careful discussion, Pope Eugene reached his decision. On December 1st, 1145, he issued a papal letter known as Quantum Predecessores. Its purpose was clear. The Christian kingdoms of Europe must once again come to the aid of the Crusader states. Unlike Pope Urban II, who had called Christians to capture Jerusalem, Eugene's appeal focused upon defending what had already been won. The Holy Land needed protection. The surviving Crusader states needed reinforcements. The memory of Edessa demanded action. The letter promised spiritual rewards similar to those granted during the First Crusade. Those who sincerely took the cross and completed the journey would receive remission of certain sins according to church teaching. For medieval Christians, this represented an extraordinary promise. Faith shaped every aspect of life. The hope of spiritual salvation often outweighed concerns about wealth or comfort. Yet Eugene understood something important. A letter alone could never inspire an entire continent. He needed someone capable of stirring hearts across Europe. Only one man possessed that influence: Bernard of Clairvaux. Imagine approaching the Abbey of Clairvaux during the early spring of 1146, hidden among the forests of eastern France. The monastery appears remarkably peaceful. Simple stone buildings surround quiet courtyards. Monks move silently between prayer and daily work. Gardens provide vegetables. Nearby streams supply fresh water. There are no luxurious decorations, no grand palaces, only simplicity, humility, and devotion. Within those quiet walls lived Bernard. Although still relatively young, he had become perhaps the most respected churchman in Western Europe. His letters reached kings. His sermons filled enormous churches. His writings shaped Christian thought throughout the continent. When Pope Eugene asked Bernard to preach the new crusade, he accepted. Almost immediately, preparations began. Bernard would travel across France, Germany, and neighboring kingdoms. Everywhere he went, crowds gathered. Some traveled for days simply to hear him speak. Others climbed onto rooftops or nearby hills because churches could no longer contain the thousands arriving to listen. One of the most famous moments occurred on Easter Sunday, March 31st, 1146, at Vézelay in Burgundy. The gathering became so enormous that many people could not fit inside the church. Instead, Bernard addressed the crowd from a large wooden platform built outdoors. Imagine the scene. Spring sunlight warms the rolling hills. Thousands of people stretch across open fields. Knights stand beside merchants. Farmers beside bishops. Women and children watch quietly from the edges of the crowd. Colorful banners flutter gently in the breeze. Then, Bernard begins to speak. No recording survives. No one knows his exact words. But contemporary accounts describe their remarkable effect. He spoke of faith, of sacrifice, of protecting fellow Christians in the East, of the suffering caused by the fall of Edessa. He reminded listeners of the courage shown during the First Crusade. Many in the crowd wept openly. Others knelt in prayer. Some immediately declared their intention to join the expedition. So many volunteers came forward that the prepared cloth crosses, meant to symbolize participation, quickly ran out. According to tradition, Bernard removed pieces from his own robe and distributed them as replacement crosses. Whether every detail occurred exactly as later described remains uncertain, but one fact remains clear. His preaching inspired thousands. The movement spread rapidly. Nobles announced their participation. Knights began preparing armor. Blacksmiths worked day and night. repairing swords and horseshoes. Tailors stitched cloaks bearing the Red Cross. Monasteries prayed for those preparing to leave. Entire villages gathered to watch departing travelers. The enthusiasm reached beyond France. Soon, messengers carried Bernard's sermons into the German lands. There, another remarkable event unfolded. The Holy Roman Emperor himself decided to join the crusade. Conrad III, one of Europe's most powerful rulers, initially hesitated. Leading an empire demanded constant attention. Leaving Germany for years carried significant risks. Yet Bernard personally met with the emperor at the city of Speyer. He delivered another passionate sermon. By its conclusion, Conrad stepped forward and accepted the cross. The crowd erupted in celebration. His decision transformed the expedition. For the first time since the First Crusade, two reigning monarchs would personally lead major armies toward the Holy Land. Not only Conrad, but soon another king as well. Across the Kingdom of France, King Louis VII also answered the call. Young, deeply religious, and determined to fulfill what he believed to be a sacred duty. Louis prepared to lead thousands of French knights eastward. His wife, the remarkable Eleanor of Aquitaine, would accompany him, one of the wealthiest and most influential women in medieval Europe. Eleanor's presence would make this crusade unlike any before it. Throughout Europe, the atmosphere changed. Church bells rang, roads filled with travelers, castles prepared supplies, horses were purchased, armor polished, maps studied everywhere. People spoke of Jerusalem once more, yet beneath the excitement, questions remained. How would such enormous armies travel thousands of miles? Could Europe truly support such an expedition? Would the Byzantine Empire welcome these Western armies as allies, or fear them as unwelcome guests? No one yet knew, but one thing had become certain. The Second Crusade was no longer simply a dream preached from monastery pulpits. It had become the greatest military expedition Europe had attempted in nearly half a century. And before the year was over, tens of thousands of men and women, led by kings, would begin one of the longest journeys of the medieval world. Their destination was Jerusalem, but the road leading there would prove far more difficult than any of them imagined. By the summer of 1146, the call for a new crusade had spread across Europe like a great tide. From the rolling vineyards of France, to the dense forests of Germany, to the castles overlooking England's green hills, people spoke once again of Jerusalem. Church bells echoed through medieval towns. Monks prayed for those preparing to depart. Blacksmiths worked long into the night. Markets became busier than ever before. It seemed that an entire continent had begun looking east for ordinary people. Joining a crusade represented one of the greatest decisions of a lifetime. Few would ever travel farther than the neighboring village. Most had never seen the sea. Some had never even left the lands where they had been born. Yet now, many prepared to cross mountains, empires, and deserts in pursuit of a distant holy city. The journey would cover nearly 3,000 miles. It would require years rather than months. Few fully understood what awaited them. At the center of this remarkable movement stood two kings. One ruled the Kingdom of France, the other, the vast Holy Roman Empire. Their decision to personally lead the expedition made the Second Crusade unlike almost every military campaign before it. The first was King Louis VII of France. Born in 1120, Louis had not originally expected to become king. As the second son of King Louis VI, his early life had been shaped more by religious education than military ambition. Many believed he might one day become a monk. He learned Latin, studied scripture, and spent long hours within churches and monasteries. But history often changes unexpectedly. When his older brother died, following a riding accident, Louis suddenly became heir to the French throne only a few years later. He found himself wearing the crown. Those who knew Louis often described him as deeply religious, quiet, thoughtful, and sincere. Unlike some medieval rulers who sought glory through conquest, Louis genuinely believed his responsibilities extended beyond politics. He viewed kingship as a sacred duty. When news of Edessa's fall reached France, he required little convincing. Many historians believe Louis had already considered making a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. The Crusade transformed that private desire into a public mission. He would no longer travel simply as a pilgrim. He would lead an army, yet Louis would not travel alone. Beside him stood one of the most remarkable women of the Middle Ages, Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine. Even today, nearly 900 years later, Eleanor remains one of medieval Europe's most fascinating figures. She inherited the vast Duchy of Aquitaine while still very young. Her lands covered much of southwestern France. They produced vineyards, great castles, busy ports, and prosperous towns. In wealth alone, she rivaled many kings. But Eleanor offered far more than riches. She possessed intelligence, confidence, and remarkable political skill. She enjoyed poetry, music, courtly culture, and conversation with scholars. Unlike many noble women of her time, she frequently traveled alongside her husband and took an active interest in public affairs. When Louis announced that he would lead the crusade, Eleanor made an extraordinary decision. She would accompany him, not merely as an observer, but as Queen of France. Her presence attracted enormous attention throughout Europe. Many noble women followed her example. Some accompanied their husbands. Others traveled with family members. The crusade became not only a military expedition, but also one of the largest movements of medieval society ever witnessed. While France prepared, events unfolded across the Rhine River. There, the Holy Roman Empire answered Bernard of Clairvaux's call. Its ruler, Emperor Conrad III, governed one of Europe's largest realms. His authority stretched across much of present-day Germany, Austria, and neighboring territories. Unlike France, the Holy Roman Empire consisted of numerous duchies, principalities, and bishoprics. Maintaining unity required constant diplomacy. Conrad initially hesitated. Leaving such a vast empire carried obvious risks. Powerful nobles might pursue their own ambitions during his absence. Borders required protection. Political rivals watched every decision carefully. Yet Bernard's preaching deeply affected him. At Speyer, before an enormous gathering, Conrad accepted the cross. Soon afterward, many of Germany's greatest nobles joined him. The emperor's nephew, Frederick of Swabia, also volunteered. History would later remember him by another name, Frederick Barbarossa. Although still a young nobleman, this crusade would become one of his earliest military experiences. Years later, he himself would become Holy Roman Emperor and lead the Third Crusade. But that future still lay decades away. Now, he simply prepared for the long journey east. Across Europe, the pace of preparation accelerated. Imagine visiting a medieval castle during these busy months. The courtyard hums with activity. Armorers inspect chainmail one ring at a time. Swordsmiths sharpen blades until they gleam in the sunlight. Stable hands brush powerful war horses. Carpenters repair wagons. Servants pack barrels of grain, salted meat, cheese, and dried fruit. Priests move quietly among the gathering crowds, offering blessings before departure. Families embrace one another. Some know they may never meet again. Preparing for a crusade demanded enormous expense. A knight required armor, weapons, several horses, servants, food, and money for years away from home. Many nobles mortgaged land to finance the expedition. Others sold property entirely. Monasteries sometimes agreed to safeguard estates until their owners returned. Not everyone who took the cross possessed great wealth. Ordinary pilgrims traveled as well, farmers, craftsmen, merchants. Some hoped for spiritual rewards, others sought adventure. A few dreamed of building new lives in distant lands. Their journeys would prove even more difficult. Most walked, carrying only simple clothing, a blanket, and whatever food they could afford. The roads of medieval Europe quickly filled with travelers, moving steadily toward common gathering points. Churches offered hospitality whenever possible. Monasteries welcomed weary pilgrims. Townspeople watched endless processions pass through their gates. Children waved excitedly as knights rode beneath colorful banners, displaying lions, crosses, eagles, and fleur-de-lis. The atmosphere mixed excitement with uncertainty. No one truly knew what lay ahead. Maps remained incomplete. Road conditions varied greatly. Languages changed from one kingdom to the next. Mountain passes became dangerous during winter. Disease constantly threatened large groups traveling together. The memory of the First Crusade reminded everyone that the road itself often proved deadlier than battle. Even kings prepared carefully. Louis VII appointed trusted officials to govern France during his absence. Conrad made similar arrangements within the empire. Royal councils continued functioning. Taxes still required collection. Justice still needed administration. The kingdoms could not simply pause while their rulers journeyed east. One important question remained unresolved. How would such enormous armies reach the Holy Land? Most crusaders intended to travel overland. Their route would lead across the Kingdom of Hungary, through the Balkan Peninsula, and finally into the Byzantine Empire. There, they would reach one of the greatest cities on earth, Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire, a city unlike anything most Western Europeans had ever imagined. Its glittering churches, golden domes, bustling harbors, and towering defensive walls inspired awe among nearly every traveler who approached it. Yet despite sharing the Christian faith, relations between Byzantines and Western Europeans had grown increasingly complicated. The Byzantine emperor welcomed help against common enemies, but he also remembered the enormous, often disorderly armies of the First Crusade. Would these new crusaders behave as respectful allies, or become an unpredictable burden? The answer would shape everything that followed. For before the armies could face the challenges of Anatolia, they first had to pass through the greatest city of the medieval world. And there, friendship, suspicion, diplomacy, and misunderstanding would all walk side by side. By the spring of 1147, the roads of Europe had come alive. From every direction, pilgrims, knights, priests, merchants, and noble families slowly moved eastward. Some traveled on magnificent war horses draped in colorful cloth. Others walked with little more than a wooden staff, a blanket, and a small leather bag containing their few possessions. Together, they formed one of the largest movements of people the medieval world had ever witnessed. Their destination lay thousands of miles away, Jerusalem. But before they could reach the Holy Land, every traveler faced another remarkable destination, Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. For many Western Europeans, the city seemed almost mythical. Stories described towering walls, golden churches, magnificent palaces, and markets overflowing with treasures gathered from 3 continents. Some wondered if such stories could possibly be true. Others believed no earthly city could rival Rome itself. They were about to discover otherwise. The first great army to begin its journey belonged to Emperor Conrad III. During the early summer of 1147, thousands of German soldiers crossed the Danube River and entered the Kingdom of Hungary. Imagine watching the procession from the hillside above a quiet village. The line seems endless. Knights wearing polished chainmail ride beneath fluttering imperial banners. Pack horses carry barrels of grain, bundles of arrows, tents, cooking pots, and blacksmith's tools. Priests quietly recite prayers while walking beside ordinary pilgrims. Children wave from nearby cottages as the army slowly disappears toward the eastern horizon. Travel during the Middle Ages demanded patience. Most roads remained little more than dirt tracks. Heavy rain transformed them into thick mud. Bridges occasionally collapsed. Mountain passes became dangerous after storms. Every river crossing required careful organization. An army could rarely move faster than 15 or 20 miles each day. Even kings endured discomfort. Dust filled the air during dry weather. Cold rain soaked clothing without warning. Food varied from place to place. Some evenings brought warm bread and roasted meat. Others offered little more than thin soup and stale grain. Despite these hardships, the journey also revealed an astonishing variety of landscapes. The Crusaders crossed fertile farmland stretching across Central Europe. They passed vineyards, climbing gentle hills. Ancient monasteries overlooked peaceful valleys. Dense forests echoed with birdsong beneath towering oak trees. Great rivers shimmered beneath the summer sun. Each new region introduced unfamiliar customs, different languages, different architecture, different styles of clothing. For many travelers, the crusade became their first glimpse of the wider world. King Geza II of Hungary welcomed the German army cautiously. Hungary had witnessed earlier crusading expeditions decades before. Some had remained disciplined. Others had caused disorder while crossing the kingdom. This time, strict agreements governed the march. Markets supplied food. Local guides assisted with directions. The Crusaders promised to respect towns and villages. Fortunately, the crossing remained largely peaceful. As the weeks passed, Conrad's army reached the Balkans. The terrain gradually changed. Rolling farmland gave way to rugged hills. Ancient Roman roads occasionally appeared beneath centuries of wear. Old stone bridges still carried travelers across swift rivers. Ruined watchtowers reminded everyone that this region had witnessed countless empires rising and falling. Eventually, the German Crusaders approached the greatest city they had ever seen, Constantinople. Long before reaching its walls, travelers noticed its enormous size. Golden church domes sparkled beneath the sunlight. Countless ships filled the harbor. Massive defensive walls stretched mile after mile across the landscape. Few cities anywhere in the world compared. Founded originally as Byzantium, then transformed by Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, Constantinople had become the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. Although Western Europeans often called it the Byzantine Empire, its people still considered themselves Romans. Their emperor ruled from magnificent palaces overlooking the Bosporus. Their churches displayed breathtaking mosaics crafted from gold and colored glass. Their libraries preserved ancient Greek and Roman knowledge that had disappeared from much of Western Europe. Imagine entering the city for the first time. Wide stone streets bustle with merchants from every corner of the known world. Silks from China, spices from India, ivory from Africa, fine glass from Syria, furs from Russia, perfumed oils, exotic fruits, beautiful carpets. Everything imaginable fills the markets. Above them all rises the Hagia Sophia. Its enormous dome seems almost suspended in the air. Sunlight pours through dozens of windows. Golden mosaics shimmer softly beneath flickering candlelight. To many Western visitors, the church appeared almost heavenly. Some later admitted they had never imagined such beauty could exist. Yet beneath the splendor, political tensions quietly remained. The Byzantine Emperor, Manuel I Komnenos, welcomed the Crusaders with mixed emotions. He sincerely wished to see the Crusader state survive. A stronger Christian presence in the Holy Land benefited Byzantium. At the same time, he remembered the First Crusade, nearly 50 years earlier. Thousands of armed Western Europeans had unexpectedly flooded into his empire. Although many eventually continued toward Jerusalem, their enormous numbers had created significant challenges. Some had looted supplies, others ignored Byzantine authority. Manuel hoped to avoid repeating those problems. Diplomatic meetings soon followed. The emperor welcomed Conrad respectfully. Gifts were exchanged. Formal ceremonies demonstrated friendship between the two rulers. Yet caution remained evident. Neither side fully trusted the other. The Byzantines viewed many Western knights as impulsive and unpredictable. Some Western crusaders considered the Byzantines overly cautious and excessively political. Different cultures, different traditions, and different expectations often created misunderstandings. Even though both belonged to the Christian world, the Great Schism of 1054 had divided the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. Religious differences added another layer of complexity. Fortunately, serious conflict was avoided. Manuel encouraged the German army to cross the Bosporus into Asia Minor as quickly as possible. There, the Crusaders would begin the next stage of their journey. Meanwhile, several weeks later, King Louis VII and the French army finally approached Constantinople. Their arrival proved equally impressive. The French procession stretched for miles. Colorful banners bearing the fleur-de-lis fluttered above armored knights. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine rode among the nobles, attracting admiration wherever she appeared. Many Byzantine citizens gathered along the streets simply to watch the Western armies enter their city. Once again, the emperor extended generous hospitality. Lavish banquets welcomed distinguished guests. Musicians performed within palace halls. Diplomats discussed the campaign ahead. Yet Manuel quietly urged Louis to continue eastward without unnecessary delay. The Byzantine treasury could not indefinitely support tens of thousands of foreign soldiers camped outside the capital. Soon, both crusading armies crossed the narrow waters separating Europe from Asia. For many travelers, the moment felt deeply symbolic. They had left Europe behind. Ahead lay Anatolia, a vast land of rugged mountains, dry plateaus, ancient ruins, and powerful Seljuk Turkish armies. The comfortable roads of Europe were now behind them. The true hardships of the Second Crusade were only just beginning. The journey through Anatolia would test every soldier, every horse, every wagon, and every hope they carried toward Jerusalem. For the mountains ahead would prove far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. By the autumn of 1147, the great armies of the Second Crusade had crossed the Bosporus. Europe now lay behind them. Ahead stretched Anatolia, a vast land of rugged mountains, rolling plateaus, ancient Roman roads, and countless miles of wilderness. To many Western Crusaders, everything appeared unfamiliar. The forests looked different. The villages were smaller. The climate felt harsher. Even the light seemed changed beneath the wide eastern sky. What many of them did not yet understand was that the greatest enemy they would face was not a castle or a city or even an army. It was the land itself. Anatolia had once formed the heart of the Byzantine Empire. Its fertile valleys had supported prosperous cities for centuries. Roman roads had connected great trading centers from Constantinople to Syria, but much had changed after the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. The Seljuk Turks had gradually established control across much of central Anatolia. Although the Byzantine Empire still held important coastal regions, the vast interior belonged largely to Turkish rulers. Their horsemen knew every valley, every mountain pass, every water source, every hidden trail. The Crusaders did not. Emperor Manuel I had offered careful advice before the armies departed Constantinople. He warned both Conrad III and Louis VII not to underestimate the difficult journey ahead. He encouraged them to remain together, to protect their supply lines, to move cautiously. Some Byzantine guides accompanied the Crusaders, yet trust between the two sides remained limited. Many Western knights believed they understood warfare well enough without constant guidance. History would soon prove otherwise. The German army under Emperor Conrad III marched first. Thousands of soldiers moved steadily southeast along the old military roads. At first, the journey seemed manageable. The weather remained pleasant. Villages occasionally provided fresh food. Streams supplied drinking water. Roman bridges still crossed many rivers despite their great age. Each evening, the army established camp. Fires flickered beneath the stars. Priests celebrated evening prayers. Blacksmiths repaired damaged horseshoes. Cooks prepared simple meals of bread, salted meat, and whatever local supplies could be obtained. Life settled into a daily rhythm. Wake before sunrise, march for hours, rest briefly during the hottest part of the afternoon. Continue onward until evening. Repeat again the next day, but slowly. The landscape began changing. Forests became less common. Wide open plains stretched toward distant mountains. Shade disappeared. Autumn's sun baked the dry earth. Water became increasingly difficult to find. Dust rose beneath thousands of marching feet. The great army consumed enormous quantities of food every single day. Each horse required grain. Each soldier required bread and water. Finding enough supplies became a constant challenge. Local villages could rarely support such vast numbers. Food grew scarce. Prices rose quickly. Some soldiers quietly complained. Others simply accepted the hardship. Then, the Seljuk Turks began to appear. Not in large armies, not standing in orderly ranks waiting for battle. Instead, small groups of mounted archers appeared upon distant hills, watching, waiting, always just beyond reach. Imagine being a crusader standing guard one quiet afternoon. The wind moves gently across the dry grass. Everything appears peaceful. Then, far away, several riders appear upon the horizon. They pause briefly, observe the marching army, then disappear as silently as they arrived. Hours later, they return somewhere else, never close enough to engage, never remaining still for long. The Crusaders grew increasingly frustrated. European knights excelled in direct battle. Their heavy cavalry charges could shatter enemy formations. But the Seljuk horse archers fought differently. Mounted upon swift horses, they rode in loose formations, approached rapidly, released clouds of arrows, then retreated before the heavily armored knights could reach them. If pursued, they simply rode farther away. The Crusaders often found themselves chasing opponents they could never catch. Every day, the attacks became slightly bolder. Supply wagons fell behind. Small scouting parties disappeared. Stragglers became easy targets. The army remained strong, but exhaustion slowly accumulated. By late October, Conrad approached the region near Dorylaeum. The place held powerful memories. Nearly 50 years earlier, during the First Crusade, Christian armies had won a remarkable victory there against the Seljuk Turks. Many hoped history would repeat itself. Instead, the opposite occurred. On October 25th, 1147, Turkish forces launched a determined series of attacks. Rather than one great battle, the fighting unfolded throughout the day. Mounted archers surrounded portions of the Crusader army. Arrows fell continuously. The German soldiers struggled to respond. Heavy armor protected against swords, but offered little comfort against constant thirst, heat, fatigue, and relentless harassment. The Turks carefully avoided unnecessary risks. Whenever heavily armed knights attempted to charge, the horse archers simply withdrew, then circled back moments later. The attacks never truly stopped. Confusion spread throughout Conrad's army. Communication became difficult. Supply wagons blocked narrow roads. Wounded horses slowed the march. As casualties increased, the organization gradually collapsed. Finally, the emperor ordered a retreat. What began as an orderly withdrawal soon became something far more desperate. Groups of soldiers lost contact with one another. Many wandered across unfamiliar countryside searching for water. Others attempted to return toward Byzantine territory. The army that had departed Constantinople with such confidence had suffered a devastating defeat. Emperor Conrad himself narrowly escaped injury. Eventually, the surviving Germans struggled back toward the coast, where Byzantine assistance awaited them. Many historians consider the Battle of Dorylaeum one of the greatest disasters of the Second Crusade, yet the French army still remained on the march. King Louis VII had deliberately followed a different route. He hoped to avoid repeating Conrad's mistakes. His soldiers advanced more cautiously. Discipline generally remained stronger. Queen Eleanor and many noblewomen continued accompanying the expedition. For a time, the French appeared to be faring much better. Still, the same challenges remained. The roads grew rougher. Mountain passes became steeper. Supplies remained limited. Turkish horsemen continued watching every movement. Sometimes days passed without serious fighting. Then suddenly, arrows emerged from rocky hillsides. Small attacks kept everyone constantly alert. Sleep became difficult. Every distant sound during the night raised concern. Every narrow valley seemed capable of hiding an ambush. The Crusaders gradually realized they were no longer simply traveling across foreign lands. They were moving through territory controlled by an enemy who understood every advantage the landscape offered. As autumn slowly gave way to winter, the French army approached the towering mountains of southwestern Anatolia. The roads narrowed. Cliffs rose sharply above deep valleys. Ancient paths twisted around dangerous slopes. Ahead lay Mount Cadmus, one of the most treacherous stretches of the entire journey. There, nature itself would become as deadly as any battlefield, and the greatest disaster of King Louis VII's expedition was about to unfold. The defeat of Emperor Conrad III's army sent ripples of concern throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Only weeks earlier, thousands of German knights had marched confidently into Anatolia. Their banners fluttered proudly beneath the autumn sky. Their armor gleamed in the sunlight. Many believed they would soon reach Jerusalem. Instead, the harsh realities of the journey had shattered those expectations. The survivors gradually struggled back toward Byzantine-held territory. Some arrived wounded, others exhausted. Many had lost friends, family members, or trusted companions along the dusty roads of Anatolia. Emperor Conrad himself eventually reached the city of Nicaea. There, Byzantine physicians treated the wounded. Supplies were gathered. Messengers hurried south to inform King Louis VII of the disaster. The German emperor soon made an important decision. Rather than attempting another march across the dangerous interior, he would travel by sea to the Holy Land once ships became available. It was a practical choice, yet it also revealed just how devastating the campaign across Anatolia had become. Meanwhile, the French army continued its own journey. King Louis VII had received news of Conrad's defeat. The warning could not have been clearer. The road ahead demanded caution. Unlike the Germans, Louis chose to follow a more southerly route along portions of the western Anatolian coast before gradually turning inland. For a time, the decision appeared wise. The countryside offered more villages. Water remained easier to find. Byzantine settlements occasionally provided fresh supplies. The soldiers regained confidence, yet no road through Anatolia remained truly safe. Every mountain concealed hidden valleys. Every rocky hillside offered excellent positions for mounted archers. The Seljuk Turks continued watching patiently. Rarely did they risk large battles. Instead, they relied upon endurance. Time itself became one of their greatest allies. Imagine marching with the French army during those long autumn days. The morning begins before sunrise. Cold air hangs over the camp. Soldiers quietly gather their equipment. Horses are saddled. Cooking fires fade into thin columns of smoke. Soon, the great procession begins moving once more, hour after hour. Boots strike the dusty road. Armor grows heavier with every passing mile. The midday sun warms helmets until they become almost uncomfortable to wear. Water skins gradually empty. Conversations become quieter. The rhythm of marching replaces almost every other sound. Late in the afternoon, the army finally halts. Tents rise quickly. Some men repair worn boots. Others sharpen swords or mend broken harnesses. Priests offer evening prayers. Nearby, Queen Eleanor's household prepares camp with remarkable organization. Although Eleanor often receives attention in later histories because of her extraordinary personality, the reality of such a journey demanded immense endurance. Noble women faced many of the same hardships as everyone else. Dust covered expensive clothing. Cold nights brought discomfort. Illness threatened every traveler regardless of rank. Still, the queen continued forward beside her husband as the army pressed deeper into southwestern Anatolia. The terrain slowly changed once again. Broad valleys disappeared. The roads narrowed. Steep hills surrounded the travelers. Ancient mountain paths twisted through towering cliffs. Pack animals struggled over loose stones. Large wagons frequently became trapped along narrow ledges. Progress slowed considerably. Experienced guides warned that the next stretch of road would prove especially dangerous. The mountains surrounding Mount Cadmus, known today as Honaz Mountain in western Turkey, presented one of the greatest natural obstacles of the entire expedition. The ancient road wound along steep slopes where a single mistake could send horses tumbling into deep ravines. Columns of soldiers stretched for miles. The front often disappeared around distant cliffs while the rear remained far behind. Communication became increasingly difficult. One commander could rarely see another. The army gradually lost its compact formation, exactly the situation the Seljuk Turks had hoped to create. On January 7, 1148, the crisis arrived. As portions of the French army climbed the difficult mountain road, the leading units continued advancing while others paused below. Some baggage trains fell behind. Rear guards struggled to protect vulnerable sections of the column. The long line of travelers became dangerously separated. Watching from the surrounding heights, Turkish horsemen recognized the opportunity immediately. Without warning, arrows began falling from above. Mounted warriors appeared along rocky ridges. Others raced through hidden valleys before striking isolated groups. The narrow road left little room to maneuver. Heavy cavalry, usually the greatest strength of Western armies, found itself almost useless upon the steep mountain slopes. Knights could not form proper charges. Many horses slipped upon loose rocks. Panic spread among portions of the baggage train. Some frightened animals bolted toward dangerous cliffs. Supplies spilled across the narrow paths. The orderly march dissolved into confusion. King Louis VII found himself separated from much of his army. According to several medieval chroniclers, the king narrowly escaped capture. One famous account describes him climbing onto a large rock while fighting off attackers with his sword until loyal companions finally reached him. Although historians cannot verify every detail, there is little doubt that Louis faced genuine danger during the chaos. Elsewhere, the losses continued. Many soldiers became trapped along the mountain road. Others fell while attempting to escape. Food supplies disappeared. Pack animals were abandoned. The army suffered heavily without ever fighting a traditional battle. Nature, combined with careful Turkish tactics, had inflicted another devastating defeat. When the surviving French forces finally regrouped, the atmosphere had changed completely. The confidence that had filled the army upon leaving Europe had largely disappeared. Every remaining mile toward Jerusalem now seemed uncertain. Yet despite everything, the Crusaders refused to abandon the expedition. Their determination remained remarkable. Many believed reaching the Holy Land itself represented a sacred obligation. The hardships they endured only strengthened that conviction. Eventually, the battered French army descended from the mountains and reached the Mediterranean coast. There, the port city of Anatolia offered temporary relief. Ships crowded the harbor. Markets sold fresh food. Clean water became plentiful once more. For exhausted travelers, the city seemed almost like paradise after the difficult mountain crossings. Yet another painful decision now awaited. There were not enough ships to carry everyone. King Louis, Queen Eleanor, the nobility, and many knights secured passage by sea toward Antioch. Large numbers of ordinary pilgrims and poorer soldiers, however, were left behind. Many attempted to continue overland through territory still threatened by Turkish attacks. Others waited weeks hoping additional ships might arrive. Countless never completed the journey. Disease, starvation, and continuing attacks claimed many lives before they ever glimpsed the walls of Jerusalem. Those who finally reached the eastern Mediterranean carried more than physical wounds. They carried disappointment, fatigue, and growing questions. How had an expedition blessed by popes, led by kings, and supported by nearly all of Christian Europe suffered such repeated disasters? No one yet possessed the answer, but ahead, beyond the sea, lay the Principality of Antioch, one of the great Crusader states. There, old family ties, political disagreements, and difficult choices would create entirely new challenges for the leaders of the Second Crusade. For although the journey across Anatolia had finally ended, the greatest mistakes of the Crusade were still yet to come. The Mediterranean shimmered beneath the winter sun. After months of marching across Europe, crossing the Bosporus, enduring the harsh mountains of Anatolia, and surviving countless Turkish attacks, the survivors of the French army finally reached the coast. Many believed the worst was now behind them. The sea breeze felt refreshing after weeks of dusty roads. Fresh fruit returned to their tables. Clean water flowed through the bustling port of Anatolia. For a brief moment, the hardships of the journey seemed to fade. Yet beneath this welcome relief, the crusade faced another difficult reality. Thousands of pilgrims remained scattered across Anatolia. There were simply not enough ships to carry everyone. The wealthiest nobles, the royal household, senior church leaders, and many mounted knights secured passage across the Mediterranean. ordinary pilgrims often remained behind. Some waited patiently for additional vessels. Others attempted to continue the dangerous overland journey on foot. Many would never reach the Holy Land. For them, the crusade quietly ended far from Jerusalem. It remains one of the saddest chapters of the expedition. History often remembers kings and famous battles. Far less is known about the countless ordinary people whose names disappeared into the silence of medieval records. Farmers from France, young craftsmen from Germany, pilgrims from distant villages. Many had sold everything they owned to answer the Pope's call. Their stories ended somewhere along forgotten roads beneath the Anatolian sky. King Louis VII, together with Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine and the leading nobles, boarded ships bound for Antioch. Imagine standing upon the deck during that winter voyage. The sails billow gently in the wind. Seabirds circle above the masts. The coastline slowly drifts past in the distance. For the first time in months, no arrows fall from hidden hillsides. No mountain passes lie ahead. Only the endless blue waters of the eastern Mediterranean. Yet the king's thoughts are unlikely to have been peaceful. The losses had been severe. The army that departed France no longer resembled the force arriving in the Holy Land. Thousands had been left behind. Others had perished. Supplies had vanished. Confidence had faded. Still, the ultimate goal remained unchanged: Jerusalem. After several days at sea, the French fleet reached the great Crusader city of Antioch. Nestled between rugged mountains and the Orontes River, Antioch ranked among the most important cities in the eastern Mediterranean. Its massive stone walls stretched across hillsides. Ancient towers guarded every entrance. Within the city, narrow streets bustled with merchants speaking Greek, Armenian, Arabic, Latin, and Syriac. Church bells mingled with the sounds of busy marketplaces. Antioch had survived countless empires: Romans, Byzantines, Muslim dynasties, Crusaders. Every generation had left its mark upon the city. Waiting to welcome the French king stood Prince Raymond of Poitiers. Raymond ruled the Principality of Antioch, but his connection to Louis VII extended beyond politics. He was also Queen Eleanor's uncle. Raymond possessed a very different personality from the quiet and deeply religious French king. Contemporary accounts describe him as energetic, confident, charismatic, and highly experienced in frontier warfare. Unlike many newly arrived crusaders, Raymond understood the political realities of the Near East. He had spent years defending Antioch against neighboring powers. He believed the Second Crusade should focus upon the greatest immediate threat, the powerful Muslim ruler Nur ad-Din. By this time, Imad ad-Din Zengi had been assassinated in 1146. His territories passed largely to his son, Nur ad-Din. Though still a relatively young ruler, Nur ad-Din quickly demonstrated remarkable ability. He continued his father's work of strengthening Muslim unity across Syria. His armies remained active. His influence continued expanding. To Raymond, the strategy seemed obvious. The French army should remain in northern Syria. Together, they could strike at Aleppo, weakening Nur ad-Din before he became even more powerful. From a military perspective, the proposal made considerable sense. Yet Louis VII viewed the crusade differently. His deepest desire remained reaching Jerusalem. He had promised to make pilgrimage to the holy city. Changing course now felt almost like abandoning the sacred purpose of the expedition. Political tension slowly emerged, adding further complexity. Medieval chroniclers began recording stories about the close friendship between Queen Eleanor and her uncle Raymond. The two shared similar interests. Both enjoyed lively conversation. Both possessed strong personalities. Both understood courtly politics. Some later writers suggested their relationship became unusually close. Modern historians remain deeply cautious about these accusations. Many believe such stories were exaggerated or invented by political enemies after Eleanor's marriage later deteriorated. Whatever the truth, the rumors themselves proved damaging. Louis grew increasingly uncomfortable, whether driven by jealousy, political concern, or simple determination to continue toward Jerusalem. He decided to leave Antioch sooner than Raymond desired. According to several accounts, Eleanor wished to remain longer in Antioch. She reportedly supported Raymond's military strategy against Aleppo. Some medieval writers even claimed she questioned whether her marriage to Louis should continue. Again, historians debate many of these stories. The surviving sources were often written years later by authors with their own opinions and political loyalties. What can be stated with confidence is that serious disagreements emerged between the royal couple during this period. Eventually, Louis departed Antioch. Eleanor accompanied him. Their marriage, already strained, would never fully recover. Years later, the two would separate. Eleanor would soon marry Henry Plantagenet, the future King Henry II of England. Through that marriage, she would become Queen of England and mother of Richard the Lionheart and King John. Her influence upon medieval Europe would continue for decades. For now, those future events remained unseen. The French court continued south. At last, the pilgrims reached Jerusalem. Nearly 50 years had passed since the First Crusade captured the Holy City. The golden walls still rose proudly above the surrounding hills. Churches welcomed pilgrims from across Europe. Markets overflowed with merchants. The scent of incense drifted through sacred shrines. After such an exhausting journey, many crusaders felt profound emotion upon entering the city. King Louis prayed at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Other pilgrims visited the Mount of Olives, Bethlehem, and countless holy places connected with the life of Christ. For a brief time, the military failure seemed almost forgotten. The pilgrimage itself had been completed. Meanwhile, Emperor Conrad III also reached Jerusalem after recovering from his earlier injuries, once bitter rivals during parts of the journey. The two kings now reunited within the Holy City. Leaders from the Crusader states gathered beside them. Together, they faced one unavoidable question. What should the Second Crusade accomplish now? Edessa, the city whose fall had inspired the entire expedition, could no longer realistically be recovered. It lay too far away, too well defended. The frontier had changed. A new objective would be required. Councils were held. Maps spread across wooden tables. Military advisors debated strategy. Some favored attacking Aleppo. Others proposed Ascalon in the south. Eventually, attention turned toward one of the richest, most beautiful, and most ancient cities in the Middle East, Damascus. At first glance, the choice appeared logical, yet few decisions in the history of the Crusades would prove more disastrous. For Damascus had once been an occasional ally of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Attacking it would not only fail, it would ultimately strengthen the very Muslim unity the Crusaders hoped to destroy. The fate of the Second Crusade would soon be decided beneath the gardens and mighty walls of Damascus. Jerusalem welcomed the weary Crusaders with the sound of church bells. After months of hardship, the holy city finally stood before them. Its pale limestone walls glowed beneath the summer sun. The streets echoed with the footsteps of pilgrims arriving from distant lands. The scent of incense drifted through ancient churches. Candles flickered beside sacred shrines. For King Louis VII, the journey had become far more difficult than he had ever imagined. Thousands who had begun the expedition in France would never see Jerusalem. Many had fallen to hunger, disease, exhaustion, or Turkish attacks during the long crossing of Anatolia. Yet standing within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where medieval Christians believed Christ had been crucified and buried, those hardships seemed for a moment worthwhile. The French king knelt in quiet prayer. Nearby, German knights who had survived Emperor Conrad III's disastrous campaign did the same. Pilgrims embraced one another. Some wept openly, others simply sat in silence, overwhelmed by the realization that they had finally reached the destination they had dreamed about for years. The kingdom of Jerusalem had changed considerably since the First Crusade. Nearly 50 years had passed since the Crusaders captured the city in 1099. A new generation had grown up within its walls. Many nobles had never seen Europe. They spoke French, Arabic, Greek, or Armenian with equal ease. They understood the politics of the Eastern Mediterranean far better than the newly arrived Crusaders. To them, the Holy Land was no longer simply a battlefield, it was home. Jerusalem itself had become a remarkable crossroads of cultures. Pilgrims from England, France, Italy, and Germany filled the churches. Merchants arrived from Egypt, Syria, Byzantium, and distant Persia. Markets overflowed with spices, silks, glassware, olive oil, perfumes, and colorful fabrics. Stone streets wound between churches, workshops, and homes built upon foundations far older than the Crusader kingdom itself. The city breathed with history. Yet beneath its peaceful appearance, serious concerns occupied its leaders. The loss of Edessa remained fresh in everyone's mind. Nur ad-Din continued strengthening his influence across northern Syria. The balance of power in the Near East had begun shifting. The arrival of two European kings offered an extraordinary opportunity. At last, the Crusader states possessed reinforcements unlike any they had received in decades. The question now became unavoidable. Where should they strike? To answer that question, a great council assembled near Jerusalem. Historians know the meeting today as the Council of Acre. It took place on June 24th, 1148. Representatives arrived from across the Crusader states: King Louis VII of France, Emperor Conrad III of the Holy Roman Empire, King Baldwin III of Jerusalem, Queen Melisende, one of the most capable rulers the kingdom had ever known, senior bishops, military commanders, the leaders of the Knights Templar, the Knights Hospitaller, and many influential nobles gathered together. Imagine entering the great hall where the council met. Stone walls rise high above polished wooden tables. Colorful banners hang from the ceiling. Sunlight streams through narrow windows. Maps cover the tables before the assembled rulers. Messengers quietly move between groups carrying reports from distant castles. The atmosphere remains respectful, yet tense. Every decision made here may determine the future of the Holy Land. Several possible targets immediately emerged. Some argued for recovering Edessa. After all, its fall had inspired the entire crusade. But military reality quickly ended that discussion. Edessa lay too far from Jerusalem, too exposed, too difficult to defend even if recaptured. The city had also suffered significant destruction since its conquest. Recovering it would require enormous resources, with little guarantee of lasting success. Others proposed attacking Aleppo. The city served as one of Nur ad-Din's principal centers of power. Prince Raymond of Antioch had strongly supported this strategy months earlier. Defeating Nur ad-Din in northern Syria might weaken Muslim unity before it became even stronger. Yet Aleppo also presented serious logistical challenges. It lay hundreds of miles from Jerusalem. Supporting a prolonged siege there would prove extremely difficult. Attention gradually shifted toward another city, Damascus. Few cities in the medieval world possessed greater fame. Long before the Crusades, Damascus had flourished as one of the oldest, continuously inhabited cities on earth. Its history stretched back thousands of years. Ancient kingdoms, Roman emperors, Byzantine rulers, and Muslim caliphs had all governed within its walls. The city stood surrounded by fertile orchards nourished by the Barata River. Travelers often described Damascus as an oasis, a place where gardens, fruit trees, flowing water, and magnificent architecture transformed the edge of the desert into something extraordinary. Merchants arrived from every direction: silks from the east, glass from Syria, spices from Arabia, fine steel crafted by Damascus blacksmiths. Its markets ranked among the richest anywhere in the Middle East. To many Crusader leaders, capturing Damascus seemed both practical and glorious. The city lay relatively close to Jerusalem. Its wealth could strengthen the Crusader kingdom enormously. Control of Damascus might also prevent future Muslim attacks upon the Holy Land. Yet history rarely offers simple choices. For decades, Damascus had occasionally cooperated with the Kingdom of Jerusalem against common enemies. Its rulers often viewed Zengi and later Nur ad-Din with as much concern as the Crusaders themselves. Although relations had not always remained peaceful, the city had never become the Crusaders' greatest enemy. Some experienced leaders quietly questioned whether attacking Damascus might produce unintended consequences. If the city felt threatened, would it not naturally seek assistance from Nur ad-Din? Would the attack unite Muslim rulers rather than divide them? Unfortunately, those warnings received little attention. The excitement created by the arrival of Europe's kings proved difficult to resist. Many believed a swift victory would restore the reputation of the crusade after its difficult journey across Anatolia. Optimism filled the council chamber. Military plans quickly developed. The army would march east from Jerusalem, approach Damascus through its fertile western orchards, establish siege positions, and force the city to surrender before significant reinforcements could arrive. On paper, the strategy appeared entirely reasonable. No one could yet foresee how quickly events would unravel. Preparations began almost immediately. Armor was repaired once more. Supplies gathered. Horses rested after months of travel. Priests celebrated Mass before the departing armies. Throughout Jerusalem, the familiar sounds of another military expedition echoed through the streets. Blacksmiths hammered iron. Carpenters repaired wagons. Pilgrims offered final prayers inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Within only a few days, the combined armies of France, Germany, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem began marching toward Damascus. The road carried them across sunlit hills covered with olive trees and vineyards. At first, the journey seemed almost peaceful. Birds sang among the orchards. Clear streams crossed the valleys. The distant Anti-Lebanon mountains rose blue against the summer sky. Few could imagine that within this beautiful landscape, one of the greatest failures in Crusader history was quietly waiting. The Siege of Damascus would last only 4 days, yet those 4 days would change the future of the Middle East forever. The road from Jerusalem to Damascus was not a long one. Compared to the thousands of miles the Crusaders had already traveled across Europe and Anatolia, the journey seemed almost effortless. The combined armies of France, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem marched beneath the bright July sun. Thousands of knights rode beside mounted sergeants. Foot soldiers followed behind with shields resting upon their shoulders. Pack animals carried barrels of water, bundles of arrows. tents, and precious supplies. Church banners fluttered gently in the warm breeze. Priests rode among the soldiers, offering prayers and words of encouragement. Many believed victory was finally within reach. The disasters of Anatolia, the exhaustion, the hunger, the months of hardship, surely they had all led to this moment if Damascus could be captured. The Second Crusade might still be remembered as a success. Few armies in medieval history had ever assembled with such distinguished leadership. King Louis VII rode with the French knights. Emperor Conrad III marched beside the German forces. King Baldwin III commanded the soldiers of Jerusalem. Military orders, including the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, contributed experienced warriors who knew the land better than most newcomers from Europe. On paper, the Crusaders possessed every advantage, yet the city before them had been preparing as well. Damascus was unlike any fortress the Crusaders had previously encountered. Its history stretched back thousands of years, long before the Romans, long before Alexander the Great, long before the Crusades. People had already lived beside the waters of the Barada River. Generations built upon the work of those who came before them. Stone walls surrounded the ancient city. Strong gates protected the entrances. Watchtowers overlooked every approach. Inside, narrow streets formed a maze unfamiliar to outsiders. The city itself possessed something equally valuable: water. The Barada River flowed from the anti-Lebanon mountains, dividing into countless smaller channels that nourished one of the most fertile regions in Syria. Travelers often describe Damascus as a green jewel, surrounded by dry countryside. Thousands of fruit trees covered the surrounding orchards: apricots, figs, olives, pomegranates, walnuts. Tall poplar trees lined irrigation canals. Shaded pathways crossed beautiful gardens. To visitors arriving from the dusty hills surrounding Jerusalem, the landscape seemed almost magical. Ironically, these magnificent orchards would soon become one of the Crusaders' greatest obstacles. On July 24th, 1148, the crusading army reached the western outskirts of Damascus. Following traditional medieval siege tactics, the commanders chose to approach through the orchards. At first glance, the decision seemed sensible. The abundant trees offered shade from the summer heat. Fresh water remained close at hand. Fruit provided additional food supplies. The dense vegetation also concealed the army as it advanced toward the city walls. But appearances can often be deceiving. The orchards belonged to the defenders as much as the city itself. Narrow irrigation canals crisscrossed the landscape. Stone walls divided fields. Thick groves of trees limited visibility. The defenders knew every pathway, every bridge, every hidden route through the gardens. The Crusaders did not. As the army advanced, Damascus answered immediately. Archers occupied rooftops and defensive towers. Mounted soldiers launched quick attacks before disappearing once again behind the trees. Groups of defenders used the orchards almost like a natural fortress. Every grove became an ambush. Every irrigation ditch slowed advancing soldiers. The Crusaders found it difficult to maintain formation. Heavy cavalry, so effective upon open battlefields, could scarcely maneuver between dense fruit trees and narrow canals. The battle became fragmented. Small groups fought fiercely among the gardens, while commanders struggled to maintain control over the larger army. Despite these challenges, the first day brought cautious optimism. Several outer defensive positions fell. The Crusaders established camps remarkably close to the western walls. Some believed the city might surrender within days. Inside Damascus, the atmosphere grew tense. Citizens gathered food, craftsmen repaired damaged fortifications, religious leaders encouraged calm. The city's governor, Mu'in ad-Din Unur, recognized the seriousness of the threat immediately. Although Damascus had often maintained an uneasy relationship with neighboring Muslim rulers, survival now required unity. Urgent messengers rode north toward Nur ad-Din, the same ruler many Crusader leaders had hoped to isolate. The attack upon Damascus achieved exactly the opposite. Instead of dividing Muslim powers, it encouraged cooperation. Meanwhile, inside the Crusader camp, problems slowly emerged. The orchards that initially seemed so welcoming now limited movement. Food became increasingly difficult to distribute through the tangled landscape. Communication between different sections of the army suffered. Fresh water remained available, but controlling the irrigation channels proved challenging. Most importantly, the defenders continued launching constant attacks from positions they knew intimately. Every night, arrows fell into the Crusader camp. Small cavalry raids disrupted sleep. Soldiers remained constantly alert. Fatigue slowly accumulated. Then, an unexpected disagreement arose among the Crusader leaders themselves. Historians continue debating exactly why. Some believed local nobles hoped to claim Damascus after its capture. Others argued rival factions distrusted one another. Several chroniclers even suggested arguments developed over who would eventually govern the city. Whatever the precise cause, unity began weakening at the worst possible moment. On the third day of the siege, a remarkable decision changed everything. The Crusader commanders abandoned their positions on the western side of Damascus. Instead, they moved the entire army to the eastern side of the city. Perhaps they hoped weaker fortifications awaited them there. Perhaps internal disagreements influenced the choice. Modern historians still debate the reasoning. What remains beyond dispute is the consequence. The eastern side offered far fewer orchards, very little shade, and significantly less water. The fertile gardens that had previously complicated the attack had also supplied the Crusaders with food and fresh drinking water. Now, those advantages disappeared. The army found itself camped upon dry, open ground beneath the scorching Syrian summer sun. The defenders watched with astonishment. Their strongest pressure had convinced the attackers to abandon favorable ground voluntarily. Within hours, the citizens of Damascus strengthened defenses along the eastern walls. Meanwhile, more alarming news reached the Crusader commanders. Nur ad-Din's army, together with forces from Mosul, was rapidly approaching. Every passing hour reduced the Crusaders' chances of success. The besiegers now faced a difficult reality: continue the siege, risk becoming trapped between the city and a powerful relief army, or withdraw while escape remained possible. The decision came quickly. On July 28th, only 4 days after the siege began, the crusading army abandoned the attack. The retreat unfolded with surprising speed. The soldiers who had marched toward Damascus, filled with confidence, now quietly returned toward Jerusalem. No victory, no captured city, only disappointment. The reaction throughout the Crusader states bordered upon disbelief. How could such a powerful army, led by 2 kings, supported by thousands of experienced knights, fail in only 4 days? The question echoed from Jerusalem to Paris, from German monasteries to Byzantine palaces. The Second Crusade had not merely suffered defeat, it had lost the confidence of nearly everyone who had believed in it. Yet the greatest consequences still lay ahead, for while the Crusaders returned home discouraged, one man watched these events with growing satisfaction: Nur ad-Din. The failed siege had strengthened his position enormously, and in the years to come, his vision of Muslim unity would reshape the entire Middle East, preparing the way for an even greater leader, a young man named Saladin. The retreat from Damascus unfolded beneath the relentless heat of the Syrian summer. Only 4 days earlier, the combined armies of France, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem had marched toward the ancient city with confidence. Church banners fluttered proudly above thousands of soldiers. Trumpets echoed across the orchards. Many believed they stood on the edge of a glorious victory. Now, the same roads carried them away, quietly, without celebration, without triumph. The siege had ended almost as quickly as it had begun. Behind them, the walls of Damascus still stood untouched. Its markets remained open. Its people celebrated their survival. For the Crusaders, the realization settled slowly. The Second Crusade had failed. Imagine the long march back toward Jerusalem. Dust rises beneath tired horses. Few conversations break the silence. The soldiers who had once dreamed of returning home as heroes now walked with lowered heads. Some blamed poor leadership. Others believed the campaign had simply been overwhelmed by circumstances beyond human control. Many questioned decisions that had seemed sensible only days before. Why had the army abandoned the fertile western orchards? Why had the commanders failed to agree upon a single strategy? Why had such a magnificent expedition accomplished so little? No single answer existed. History rarely provides one. Instead, the failure resulted from many smaller problems coming together. The disasters in Anatolia had already weakened both the French and German armies before they ever reached the Holy Land. Thousands of experienced soldiers had been lost crossing mountains and deserts. Supplies had disappeared. Horses had died. The survivors arrived exhausted. The Crusader leaders themselves also carried different priorities. King Louis VII viewed the expedition primarily as a sacred pilgrimage. Emperor Conrad III hoped to restore Christian prestige after the defeat of his own army. The nobles of Jerusalem thought first about defending the Crusader states. Each perspective possessed its own logic, yet together they often produced disagreement rather than unity. The attack upon Damascus revealed those divisions with painful clarity. Even medieval chroniclers struggled to explain what had happened. Some accused local nobles of jealousy. Others blamed poor military planning. Still others suggested fear of Nur ad-Din's approaching army forced the withdrawal. Modern historians continue debating these questions. There is no simple explanation, only the certainty that the opportunity had been lost. Meanwhile, inside Damascus, relief spread throughout the city. Families emerged cautiously into the streets. Merchants reopened their shops. Craftsmen repaired the small amount of damage caused during the brief siege. Religious leaders offered prayers of thanksgiving. The orchards surrounding the city once again filled with farmers, tending fruit trees beneath the summer sun. To many citizens, the danger had passed almost as suddenly as it had appeared. Yet the political consequences reached far beyond Damascus itself. The city's ruler, Mu'in ad-Din un-Nur, recognized an uncomfortable truth. Although Damascus had survived, its independence now seemed increasingly fragile. The attack by the Crusaders had demonstrated that the city could no longer rely upon balancing relationships between competing powers. Protection would require stronger allies, and only one ruler possessed the growing strength necessary to provide that security: Nur ad-Din, the very man whom Prince Raymond of Antioch had urged the Crusaders to attack months earlier. Ironically, the failed siege accomplished precisely what Nur ad-Din had hoped for. Muslim unity became easier to achieve. The divisions that had once helped the First Crusade succeed gradually began disappearing. Instead of viewing neighboring Muslim rulers as rivals, many increasingly recognized the need for cooperation against future Crusader attacks. For Nur ad-Din, the victory required almost no direct fighting. His approaching army had influenced events before it even reached Damascus. Sometimes, The mere possibility of arrival changes history as much as an actual battle. Back in Jerusalem, the mood remained subdued. The arrival of Europe's two great monarchs had promised so much. The departure would bring far less. King Louis VII remained in the Holy City for several months. He continued visiting sacred places, praying quietly within churches, seeking spiritual comfort after the disappointments of the campaign. Emperor Conrad III stayed for a shorter time. Eventually, he departed by sea for Constantinople. There, the Byzantine Emperor Emmanuel I welcomed him once again, despite earlier misunderstandings. The two rulers now found themselves discussing the future of the Eastern Mediterranean rather than immediate military campaigns. Soon afterward, Conrad began the long journey back toward Germany. King Louis followed several months later. His return to France proved far quieter than his departure. No enormous crowds gathered to celebrate victory. No conquered cities awaited his arrival. The king had fulfilled his pilgrimage, but the crusade itself had achieved none of its principal objectives. Even his personal life had changed profoundly. The difficult journey had deepened the growing distance between Louis and Queen Eleanor. The disagreements that emerged in Antioch never fully disappeared. Years of marriage, combined with the hardships of the crusade, had strained their relationship beyond repair. In 1152, only a few years after returning to France and their marriage was officially annulled, history quickly took another remarkable turn. Only weeks later, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, the future King Henry II of England. Together, they would establish the Plantagenet dynasty. Their sons would include Richard the Lionheart and King John. In this unexpected way, the Second Crusade helped reshape not only the Middle East, but also the future history of England and France. Meanwhile, Bernard of Clairvaux, the man whose sermons had inspired thousands to take the cross, faced growing criticism. Many wondered how an expedition blessed by the church could end in failure. Some questioned Bernard directly. Had God withdrawn divine favor? Had the Crusaders committed some unknown sin? Bernard answered with humility. He argued that human weakness, not divine failure, had produced the disappointing outcome. He reminded critics that even biblical history contained moments when God's people suffered setbacks despite sincere faith. His reputation remained largely intact. Yet the confidence surrounding crusading had undeniably changed. The effortless optimism that followed the First Crusade no longer existed. Future expeditions would require more than enthusiasm. They would demand careful planning, strong leadership, and realistic expectations. As Europe slowly returned to ordinary life, the Holy Land entered a new era. The Crusader states still survived. Jerusalem remained under Christian control. Antioch and Tripoli continued standing, but everyone now understood that their future had become far less certain. Across Syria, Nur ad-Din quietly expanded his influence, patiently, methodically, much as his father Zengi had done years earlier. He strengthened cities, built schools and hospitals, supported religious institutions, and continued uniting Muslim territories under his leadership. Few people realize that among those learning beneath Nur ad-Din's growing influence was a young Kurdish officer serving another ruler in Egypt. His name was Yusuf ibn Ayyub. History would remember him by a different name, Saladin. His rise would transform the Middle East forever, and within a single generation, the Christian world would once again hear an urgent call for a crusade. This time, the stakes would be even greater than before. The ships carrying the survivors of the Second Crusade gradually disappeared beyond the eastern horizon. One by one, kings, knights, pilgrims, and priests began the long journey home. The roads that had once echoed with songs of hope now carried quieter conversations. There would be no great victory to celebrate, no captured city to display before Europe, only memories, some inspiring, many painful. The Second Crusade had become one of the greatest disappointments of the medieval age. Yet history rarely ends with a single defeat. Instead, its consequences often unfold slowly, like ripples spreading across still water. For the Crusader states, the failure created immediate concern. The kingdom of Jerusalem remained standing. Antioch still guarded the northern frontier. Tripoli continued overlooking the Mediterranean coast, but the confidence that had followed the First Crusade had largely disappeared. The rulers of these states understood that Europe could not always be counted upon to send enormous armies across the continent. When help finally arrived, success was no longer guaranteed. The future would depend increasingly upon their own strength. Far away in France, King Louis VII returned to a kingdom that had changed during his long absence. Fields had continued producing wheat, markets remained busy, castles still overlooked the countryside. Life had moved forward without him. The king resumed his responsibilities with quiet determination. Yet those who knew him noticed a difference. The crusade had aged him. Months of hardship, responsibility, and disappointment had left their mark. He remained deeply devoted to his faith, but his confidence had softened into humility. His marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine continued to deteriorate. The disagreements that had begun during the journey through Antioch became increasingly impossible to ignore. Political differences, personal distance, and the absence of a surviving male heir complicated matters further. Finally, in 1152, church authorities declared the marriage annulled. Officially, the reason involved their close family relationship under church law. Unofficially, years of growing unhappiness had made reconciliation unlikely. The consequences proved extraordinary. Only 8 weeks later, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, the energetic Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. 2 years afterward, Henry became King Henry II of England. Suddenly, much of western France came under the control of the English crown through Eleanor's inheritance. The political map of medieval Europe shifted dramatically. Future generations would witness centuries of rivalry between England and France. In many ways, the consequences of the Second Crusade reached far beyond the Holy Land. Meanwhile, Emperor Conrad III also resumed governing the Holy Roman Empire. His military reputation had suffered after the disasters in Anatolia, yet he remained a capable ruler. Rather than dwelling upon past failures, he focused upon strengthening his empire. His nephew, Frederick of Swabia, continued gaining valuable experience in government and warfare. Only a few years later, Frederick would become emperor himself. History would remember him as Frederick Barbarossa, one of the most famous rulers of the Middle Ages. Ironically, he too would eventually answer the call for another crusade, but that chapter still lay decades in the future. The man who perhaps faced the greatest personal disappointment was Bernard of Clairvaux. Only a few years earlier, his sermons had inspired thousands. Entire cities gathered simply to hear him speak. Kings accepted the cross after listening to his words. Now, questions surrounded him. Why had God allowed the expedition to fail? Had Bernard misunderstood divine will? Had the church promised too much? Letters arrived criticizing the crusade. Some questioned Bernard directly. Others accused him of inspiring needless suffering. Bernard answered with remarkable honesty. He did not deny the failure. Instead, he reminded his readers that victory could never be guaranteed by human plans alone. He argued that many crusaders had answered sincerely, that their intentions remained honorable, that human pride, poor decisions, and the mysterious workings of history often produced outcomes no one desired. His explanation satisfied some, others remained unconvinced. Yet Bernard's influence endured until his death in 1153. He remained one of Europe's most respected churchmen. Back in the eastern Mediterranean, the greatest beneficiary of the Crusaders' failure quietly expanded his influence, Nur ad-Din. Unlike many conquerors remembered primarily for battlefield victories, Nur ad-Din possessed remarkable patience. He understood that lasting power depended upon more than armies. Throughout Syria, he strengthened cities, built schools for religious learning, established hospitals, supported judges known for fairness, repaired roads, encouraged trade. He hoped to unite Muslim territories not simply through conquest, but through good government. This balanced approach earned him growing respect across the region. Damascus, the very city the Crusaders had unsuccessfully besieged, gradually moved closer to Nur ad-Din. Its rulers understood that cooperation offered greater security than isolation. In 1154, only 6 years after the failed siege, Nur ad-Din peacefully entered Damascus. The city became part of his expanding realm. Without the disastrous Crusader attacks, such a union might have taken far longer. History sometimes unfolds through unexpected consequences. The Crusaders had hoped to weaken Muslim power. Instead, they had accelerated its unification. Meanwhile, farther south, another region quietly attracted Nur ad-Din's attention: Egypt, ruled by the weakening Fatimid Caliphate. Egypt remained wealthy but politically unstable. Its fertile Nile Valley produced enormous agricultural wealth. Its ports connected the Mediterranean with the Red Sea and beyond. Whoever controlled Egypt would command tremendous resources. Nur ad-Din recognized its importance immediately. Among the commanders serving within his growing army was a trusted Kurdish general named Shirkuh. Traveling alongside him was his young nephew, a thoughtful officer who rarely attracted much attention. His name was Yusuf ibn Ayyub. The world would later know him simply as Saladin. At this moment, few people could have predicted his future. He was not yet a king, not yet a conqueror, not yet the legendary opponent of Richard the Lionheart. He quietly observed, learned, served experienced commanders, prepared for responsibilities still beyond the horizon. Sometimes, history's greatest figures begin their journeys unnoticed. While Nur ad-Din strengthened Syria, the Crusader states faced increasing uncertainty. The rulers of Jerusalem recognized that future conflicts would require stronger castles, better diplomacy, and more disciplined armies. The military orders grew increasingly important. The Knights Templar expanded their network of fortresses. The Knights Hospitaller improved hospitals while also strengthening military defenses. Great castles such as Crac des Chevaliers became symbols of determination. Massive stone walls overlooked mountain passes. Deep wells supplied water during sieges. Enormous storehouses held grain capable of feeding defenders for months. These fortresses represented more than military engineering. They reflected the growing realization that the Holy Land would not be secured by one glorious campaign. Instead, its future would depend upon endurance, year after year, generation after generation. As Europe gradually turned its attention toward other political struggles, the Eastern Mediterranean entered a period of uneasy balance. The Second Crusade had ended. Its armies had departed. Yet the deeper contest between the Crusader states and the increasingly united Muslim world continued. Quietly, patiently, both sides prepared for whatever future might bring. And before another generation had passed, that future would arrive in dramatic fashion, for a new leader was rising, one whose name would become known from Scotland to Cairo, one who would recapture Jerusalem itself, and whose victories would inspire Europe to launch the greatest crusade since the first. The age of Saladin was about to begin. The Second Crusade had ended, the banners had been lowered, the armies had returned home. The roads stretching from Jerusalem to Europe gradually grew quiet once more. Yet beneath that calm surface, the balance of power in the Middle East continued to change. History rarely pauses simply because one campaign has ended. Instead, new leaders emerge, new alliances form, new ambitions quietly take shape. And during the years following the Second Crusade, one ruler above all others reshaped the future of the region, Nur ad-Din. By the middle of the 12th century, he had become one of the most respected Muslim rulers of his age. Unlike many kings remembered only for battlefield victories, Nur ad-Din believed that a strong kingdom rested upon justice as much as military strength. Travelers described his court as disciplined rather than extravagant. He lived more modestly than many rulers of the period. He listened carefully to judges, supported scholars, built schools where theology, law, and literature were taught. Hospitals cared for the sick regardless of wealth. Public fountains supplied clean water to travelers. Markets remained active beneath his protection. His government sought stability instead of endless conquest. This reputation strengthened his authority throughout Syria. Many cities accepted his leadership willingly. Others recognized that resisting him offered little advantage. In 1154, Damascus formally became part of Nur ad-Din's growing realm. The ancient city that had survived the failed Crusader siege only a few years earlier now stood united with Aleppo under one ruler. It was an extraordinary achievement for generations. Syria had often been divided among competing dynasties. Now, its two greatest cities worked together. The vision first imagined by Zengi had become reality. Yet Nur ad-Din looked beyond Syria. To the southwest lay Egypt. The fertile Nile Valley had long supported one of the richest civilizations on earth. Even during the Crusades, Egypt remained enormously important. Its farms produced abundant grain. Its ports connected Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Indian Ocean. Control of Egypt meant wealth, trade, resources, and strategic power. At that time, Egypt was ruled by the Fatimid Caliphate, once among the strongest powers in the Islamic world. The Fatimid government had gradually weakened. Court rivalries consumed its leaders. Viziers competed for influence. Military factions struggled for control. The country remained prosperous, but politically fragile. Both Nur ad-Din and the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem watched these developments carefully. Each understood that whoever gained influence in Egypt would dramatically reshape the balance of power. Nur ad-Din chose one of his most trusted commanders for this delicate mission, a seasoned general named Shirkuh, strong, experienced, and fiercely loyal. Shirkuh led several expeditions into Egypt during the 1160s. Traveling beside him was his young nephew, a quiet officer named Yusuf ibn Ayyub. Few people paid much attention to him. He was neither the senior commander nor the most famous warrior. He spent much of his time observing, learning, listening. Those who later knew him often remarked upon his calm personality. Unlike many ambitious young nobles, he did not seek attention. He preferred careful planning over reckless courage. Patience became one of his greatest strengths. History remembers him by another name, Saladin. Imagine Cairo during these years. The Nile flows gently beneath the afternoon sun. Merchant boats carry grain toward bustling markets. Mosques rise above crowded streets. Scholars gather within libraries copying ancient manuscripts. Caravans arrive from the Sahara carrying ivory, gold, and rare spices. The city remains one of the greatest centers of learning and commerce anywhere in the medieval world. Yet behind the magnificent palaces, political uncertainty quietly grows. Ministers compete for influence. Armies shift their loyalties. Foreign powers observe every development. Into this complicated world arrive Shirkuh and Saladin. Their first expeditions achieve mixed success. Diplomatic negotiations alternate with military campaigns. Alliances change rapidly. Sometimes former enemies become temporary partners. Sometimes yesterday's allies become tomorrow's rivals. Such was medieval politics. Nothing remained fixed for long. Finally, in 1169, after years of campaigning, Shirkuh became vizier of Egypt. His triumph, however, proved brief. Only weeks later, he died unexpectedly. Responsibility now passed to his nephew, Saladin. Many observers underestimated him. He appeared young, reserved, unassuming. Few imagined he possessed the ability to unite one of history's greatest empires. Yet, quietly, methodically, Saladin began strengthening his position. He reformed the government, improved military organization, won the confidence of local leaders, maintained loyalty to Nur ad-Din while gradually building his own reputation. Back in the Crusader states, these developments caused increasing concern. The Kingdom of Jerusalem still survived. Its castles remained strong. The Knights Templar and Knights Hospitaller continued defending important frontiers. Pilgrims still arrived from Europe. Markets remained busy. Church bells continued ringing across Jerusalem. Outwardly, life seemed stable, but experienced leaders understood that the political landscape had changed dramatically since the First Crusade. Nearly 70 years earlier, the Crusaders had faced divided Muslim rulers. Now, unity appeared increasingly possible. That transformation owed much to the failure of the Second Crusade. Had Damascus fallen in 1148, history might have followed an entirely different path. Instead, the failed siege encouraged Muslim cooperation. It strengthened Nur ad-Din. It opened the road that eventually carried Saladin to power. Sometimes, defeat shapes history more profoundly than victory. Throughout Europe, interest in the Holy Land gradually faded. Many nobles now focused upon local disputes. Kings concerned themselves with rival kingdoms. Castles required maintenance. Harvests demanded attention. The memory of the Second Crusade lingered. Its disappointing outcome made many rulers cautious about launching another enormous expedition. Yet Jerusalem remained sacred. Pilgrims continued traveling there every year. No one doubted its spiritual importance. The question remained whether Europe would ever again send another great crusading army. The answer depended upon future events, and those events were already approaching. In 1174, Nur ad-Din died unexpectedly after a brief illness. His passing created uncertainty throughout his expanding realm. Many wondered whether everything he had built might now collapse. Instead, another remarkable leader stepped forward, Saladin. Patiently, he united Egypt and Syria beneath his own authority, just as Zengi had imagined, just as Nur ad-Din had pursued. The dream of Muslim unity had finally become reality across the Holy Land. Crusader leaders watched carefully. They recognized the growing danger, yet few fully appreciated just how capable Saladin truly was. Within little more than a decade, he would defeat the Crusader armies at the Battle of Hattin. Jerusalem itself would return to Muslim rule. The shock would echo across Europe just as the fall of Edessa had done decades earlier. Another pope would issue another call. Another generation of kings would answer. Among them, Richard the Lionheart, Philip II of France, and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. The Third Crusade, one of the greatest military expeditions of the medieval world, was already beginning to take shape beyond the horizon, and in many ways, its story began with the lessons, the failures, and the lasting consequences of the Second Crusade. The Second Crusade ended not with the triumphant capture of a great city, nor with the joyful ringing of church bells across Europe, but with quiet reflection. Its armies had crossed continents. Kings had abandoned their thrones for years. Thousands had answered what they believed was a sacred calling. Yet the great expedition had failed to achieve its purpose. Edessa remained lost. Damascus remained unconquered. And the balance of power in the Middle East had shifted in ways few could have imagined. For many people living at the time, the outcome seemed deeply confusing. How could an expedition blessed by the Pope, led by two of Europe's most powerful kings, supported by countless knights, and inspired by one of Christianity's greatest preachers, end in disappointment? It was a question that echoed through monasteries, royal courts, and quiet village churches for generations. Yet history often teaches its greatest lessons through failure rather than success. The Second Crusade became one of those lessons. It revealed that courage alone could not guarantee victory. Faith alone could not overcome poor planning. Numbers alone could not conquer unfamiliar landscapes. The Crusaders had underestimated the challenges before them. The mountains of Anatolia, the skill of the Seljuk horse archers, the complexity of politics within the Crusader states, the importance of local alliances. Every one of those factors shaped the outcome. Looking back today, historians often describe the Second Crusade as a turning point. The First Crusade had filled Europe with confidence. Many believed that determination and faith could overcome any obstacle. The Second Crusade reminded everyone that history rarely follows such simple paths. Victory required preparation, unity, patience, and sometimes a willingness to listen to those who understood the land better than newcomers. Ironically, some of the Crusaders' greatest mistakes strengthened the very forces they hoped to weaken. The attack upon Damascus became the clearest example. Instead of dividing Muslim rulers, it encouraged greater cooperation. Instead of weakening Syria, it strengthened it. Within only a few years, Nur ad-Din united Damascus and Aleppo. Later, Saladin united Egypt and Syria. The road leading toward the recovery of Jerusalem by Muslim forces began, in many ways, with the failure outside Damascus in 1148. Yet history is never only about armies and rulers. Behind every famous event lived ordinary people. Imagine the countless pilgrims who never appeared in royal chronicles, the blacksmith from Burgundy who left his village hoping to see Jerusalem, the farmer from Bavaria who sold his small field to finance the journey, the young monk who copied prayers each evening beside a campfire, the mother who waited years for her husband to return. Some came home forever changed, others never returned at all. Their names have largely disappeared from history, yet they formed the heart of the crusade itself. The journey also transformed those who survived. King Louis VII returned to France quieter than before. His marriage ended. His kingdom continued. He remained respected as a devout ruler, but the optimism of his youth had faded. Emperor Conrad III devoted himself once more to governing the Holy Roman Empire. Bernard of Clairvaux spent his remaining years reflecting upon the expedition he had so passionately encouraged. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine entered an entirely new chapter of history. Her marriage to Henry II of England helped shape medieval Europe for generations. Through her children, she became the mother of kings, among them Richard the Lionheart, a ruler whose name would become forever linked with the Third Crusade, far away in the Middle East. The legacy of the Second Crusade continued unfolding. Nur ad-Din built upon the opportunities created by the Crusaders' mistakes. His careful leadership inspired respect across Syria. When Saladin eventually rose to power, he inherited more than armies. He inherited the dream of unity first imagined by Zengi and strengthened by Nur ad-Din. That dream would eventually reshape the entire region. Less than 40 years after the Second Crusade, the world witnessed another extraordinary event, the Battle of Hattin. In 1187, Saladin defeated the army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Soon afterward, Jerusalem itself surrendered. The city that had remained under Christian rule since 1099 returned to Muslim control. News spread across Europe, just as the Fall of Edessa had done decades earlier. Once again, church bells rang. Popes issued urgent appeals. Kings prepared for another expedition. This time, the leaders included Richard the Lionheart, Philip II of France, and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. The Third Crusade would become one of history's most famous campaigns, yet it stood upon foundations laid by the successes and failures of the Second Crusade. Today, nearly 9 centuries later, the castles still remain. The mighty walls of Croix des Chevaliers still rise above the Syrian hills. The ancient streets of Damascus continue welcoming travelers. Jerusalem remains one of the world's most sacred cities. Constantinople, now known as Istanbul, still watches over the Bosporus. The monasteries of France, the castles of Germany, the mountain passes of Turkey, and the valleys of the Holy Land all continue carrying quiet echoes of those remarkable years. Modern historians no longer view the Crusades as simple stories of heroes and villains. Instead, they reveal a far richer picture, a meeting of civilizations, a clash of political ambitions, a struggle shaped by religion, trade, culture, diplomacy, and human choices. The Crusades brought conflict, but they also increased contact between East and West. Ideas traveled alongside armies. Knowledge crossed borders. Architecture, medicine, mathematics, navigation, and commerce all evolved through centuries of interaction. History reminds us that even the darkest conflicts often leave behind unexpected exchanges that shape future generations. As our own journey through the Second Crusade now gently comes to an end, imagine standing upon a quiet hill overlooking Jerusalem at sunset. The golden light bathes the ancient stone walls. A soft evening breeze carries the scent of olive trees across the surrounding valleys. Pilgrims slowly walk home along narrow streets. Church bells echo in the distance. Soon, the evening call to prayer joins them. For a brief moment, different traditions share the same peaceful sky. The centuries seem to disappear. The armies have long since departed. The banners have faded. The swords have fallen silent. Yet the cities remain. The rivers continue flowing. The mountains still stand exactly where they stood when medieval pilgrims first crossed them nearly 900 years ago. History has a remarkable way of reminding us that kingdoms rise and fall, victories and defeats fade into memory, but the landscapes quietly endure. They wait patiently for each new generation to walk their roads, to ask new questions, and to understand the past with greater wisdom than those who lived it. Thank you for joining me tonight on this peaceful journey through the history of the Second Crusade. If you enjoyed tonight's story, I hope you'll return for another evening with Whispered History, where together we'll continue exploring the forgotten kingdoms, legendary battles, remarkable people, and timeless stories that shaped our world. Until next time, may your evening be peaceful, may your dreams be gentle, and may history softly guide you into a restful sleep. Good night.